everyone. Welcome back to Find Joy with Jen. I'm your host, Jenny Dean. I'm here at the Kin in Venice, California with Jesseca Lane. Hey, Jess.
Hi.
Find Joy with Jen is all about having meaningful conversations with accomplished individuals and exploring how they discovered their unique sense of joy. In today's episode, I'm excited to connect with Jesseca Lane, co-founder of Elite Performance Coaching Group. With 20 years of experience in marketing and business, Jesseca is currently pursuing her master's in clinical psychology. Her mission is to help others unlock their full potential, and she is deeply passionate about the idea that true performance is driven by well-being, including mental health. So, let's dive right in.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I just loved the first time that we met, and I think just the platform, that you're really allowing folks. So it's great to be brought together by the Kin. Originally, I'm from Chicago, so that was actually almost my first 40 years, which is crazy to think about how time flies. I grew up in Chicago with a single mom, and my dad passed when I was really young, so I think some adversity in younger life always kind of drove me to work pretty hard from a young age. I had a really good protective system in terms of friends and teachers growing up, but I really dove into sort of the performance and productivity side of things. So that's kind of what drove me, and I ended up traveling a ton for work pre-COVID. And at the same time, I had a few friends move out to California, and I'd sort of seen what was possible, and I'd always had this curiosity and been drawn here. And so I kind of found myself gravitating towards here, Santa Monica, Venice, every time I was here. And finally COVID hit, and I had the opportunity to come, and it was wow, I sort of had partially manifested it a little bit already. And it was just the right time to sort of claim what was mine. And so I moved out to Santa Monica in January 2021. And it's been the best move I've ever made for so many different reasons, but so rewarding because I feel like it was something that I sort of manifested.
It's so interesting how we unconsciously manifest things that we almost don't realize that we are just by being ourselves, being mindful, practicing gratitude, and really going through life in a way that, where you're open-minded and you're open to the possibilities. Would you say that that's something that you agree with in terms of, growing up from a child to then, an adolescent to a young woman to finally where you are today? Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I do. I think the mindfulness piece and the awareness piece is really important too, if you think about it over time. And what I mean by that is the ability to create meaning even from adversity, and to build resilience. I mean, life, we have a million things coming at us a million times a day, it feels like, and so it can get heavy. And I think, this idea of reflection, paying attention, and staying true to yourself, and creating meaning even through, some of the difficult things is really then, on the other side, some of the unique value that you can put back out into the world, right?
Yeah.
At least that's how I've seen it,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
How would you say that you've been able to convert some of the suffering and the pain that you've endured into positivity, into manifesting what you're doing today? How would you say that you've been able to do that?
Yeah, oh gosh, it's such a good question, and I feel like it's really close to my heart these days. I think a lot, thank you. I think a lot for me has been being really transparent and kind of sharing just not only the wins, but also some of where maybe, I did have blockers and how maybe I've approached those. And I think the reason that's so powerful, we touched on this a little bit when we met for coffee, but is because, we can all see ourselves a little bit, even if it's, in someone else's struggles when they share. It's not just, it doesn't have to be exactly the same struggle. But I think the idea that people can take meaning also, from what you share. So for me, A lot of it was working through my own blockers in therapy. Some things specifically to do with losing my dad at an early age, how that did drive productivity or performance in me, trying to find worth. And it did drive some good and, got me all the way here to speaking with you. And there was some work to do behind the scenes. And I think being transparent about, like, both of those things has led me to this authentic place, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, here's what you saw. Now I'm going to show you, here's what you didn't see.
Yes.
Like, that's really powerful to me.
Yeah, especially the sentiment that just reminded me of, like, universe, show me how good it can get, right? Like, especially when, we're experiencing things that we feel like we can't survive from. And I know there's probably viewers out there that have experienced trauma and loss and grief, just like yourself, that can relate to that. But universe, show me how good that it can get, I think is so powerful when we are at the lowest of the lows in those experiences, to really just keep us going.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like this combination of, like, I think having faith and manifesting, but then also, taking accountability and kind of looking within and thinking about what I can do, and even if it's only looking at that day or the next step in front of you. I think I used this analogy with you before, and I don't know if anyone else likes this, but it's like my favorite analogy. I don't know why, but it's like, you could say, like, universe, bake me a cake. And the universe will be like, okay, Jess, here is the bowl, the spatula, the cake mix, the oil, all of the ingredients, and here's even the pan, but you still have to put all that stuff together, figure out the right measurements, and actually bake that cake yourself, don't you, in order to get it. And, it's a little bit of a long-winded analogy, but you get it,
Yeah,
and it's sort of like, I think of it as kind of like that combination of things that, you need to be able to understand in order to, I think, take full advantage of manifestation. It's like you got to be ready to kind of understand it then and sort of take advantage of it when it presents itself,
Exactly. And I think that it's so interesting when we think about the universe and we think about, spirituality and manifestation. Sometimes these things can be challenging to practice in our everyday life when mental health comes into play. I mean, I think so many of us struggle with anxiety, depression, different types of mental illnesses that come about from, childhood trauma, as well as just in addition to our digital world and the amount of visibility that we all have into people's everyday lives and comparing ourselves to others, and just the impact of having your eyes on a screen all the time, right? So I think that just kind of leads me to my question for you, Jess, is like, how do you, practice manifestation, spirituality, positivity, considering those, things that we all deal with, right? Like anxiety, depression, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to look different for everyone. I think, like, again, breaking it down into small chunks and not thinking of it as something to solve, but rather a practice is sort of just a first step, right? Like, happiness isn't, I had a really great therapist back in Chicago who, Rose, and she had this great whiteboard, and I think I might have told you this one, and it was like, she just drew a line, and it was all these ups and downs of life, and then she drew this plateau, and she's like, this happiness plateau, yeah, it doesn't exist. You don't just get there and sort of, just coast forever. And so, like, I think understanding and giving yourself a little bit of space, when you are feeling, down or not great, like, that's also sort of like, I think a little bit of the grace. And then I think also understanding, like, what you're grateful for and really breaking it down into small chunks. And the reason I say that is because if you were to wake up and you were to jot down 3 things that you're grateful for every day, that not only increases your gratitude that day, but it increases, like, your gratitude over time for those things. It increases your awareness of what makes you happy. If you were to maybe also add in a little bit of a glimmer, to your morning journal, or even just jot down something that's a challenge. The format I like is kind of this, like, 3 things you're grateful for. Kind of some free space, whether that's a glimmer or a challenge, and then your intentions for the day. And those are less of a to-do list, even though, cool, do you. It's more like, how do I want to show up today?
Yeah. Can you tell viewers a little bit more what you mean by glimmer?
Yeah. Like, for instance, I have a dog, as many of us do here in Southern California. And
What's your dog's name?
That's Ruby Lane. Ruby.
Shout out Ruby.
Shout out Ruby. She's turning 4 soon, December 28th, yes. And, one of my glimmers daily happens to be, like, my walks with Ruby and just seeing her enjoy nature. And it sounds really corny, but it's very grounding. We hear sort of, like, our sunlight, our whole thing. So for me, like, those are a lot of mini glimmers all in one. Our park walks, our beach time. And the more that I think that you're able to focus on those glimmers, it's like almost the more that you can create them, and sort of like cherish them and then pass maybe even just like a little bit of that on, or enjoy it even more with, say, like another dog neighbor, dog parent rather,
Have you ever heard of the difference between a glimmer and a trigger?
Well, I think I know what you're saying, but tell me what you,
So I've kind of heard that there's things in life that will trigger us, right?
Yeah.
And then there's things in life that we can notice as a glimmer. So I just wanted to point that out, like the difference and the contrast. And in life, we have the dark, we have the light, but they all kind of coexist and coincide together, and they wouldn't exist without one another, right? Like we need those triggers in order to appreciate those glimmers. So thanks for bringing that up. I actually love that.
Yeah. And trigger has more negative connotations and tends to, we tend to think of being triggered as a verb, which may allude to us being sent into some sort of negative emotional state as a result, versus a glimmer sends us into more like a positive emotional state. And so, we can't avoid, to your point, always being triggered. But the first state is awareness, and one of the really, like, sort of interesting, like, small tools is kind of, just like one sheeter in the morning, evening, whenever works for you. That will help bring out awareness in a way that feels like you can kind of, like, chunk it out, and it doesn't feel like, I need to solve my happiness, It's, like, not a thing, And I think that's kind of the first step, is, like, solving happiness or arriving to the plateau, remember? That's, like, not a thing. So I think that acceptance and awareness are kind of the first two steps there.
Yeah. Do you believe in the law of attraction?
Absolutely. I decided to go back to school before co-founding Elite Performance Coaching Group, before I met Dr. Todd, my business partner. And had I not been in a position to receive that meeting, a happenstance meeting with him over, bad vegan pizza, which is a funny separate story, I would not, we wouldn't be here today and talking about it like we are now, and we wouldn't be business partners, because I wouldn't have taken that first step and then been able to, like, attract sort of those associated opportunities. It wouldn't have gone the same way had he not, handed me his card, Elite Psychology Group.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, like maybe you noticing those glimmers and being aware, like you said, having that awareness of those positive things around you day to day, like Ruby, made you more aware even of this opportunity.
Exactly. And speaking of being aware, I had some unsolicited advice on a yoga trip once from a Reiki healer, and it's not to say that I'm not I have anything against Reiki healers. It was just like, there was a lot of advice coming. And one of the things that she said to me was I was kind of like a dip my toe in manifester, meaning I would take a step in a direction and then I would hold for a second and just see what the reaction was and see if I got anything. And she wasn't wrong, I don't know if that's how I always am.
Yeah.
But again, with the awareness, because then it's like, oh, well, I can kind of see that that's true in the instance where I decided to go back to school. I knew how my prior 20 years of my career, I didn't know exactly how this would all fit together, did I? But then all of a sudden, being open, the law of attraction, manifesting, somehow the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And again, nothing's perfect. There's so much work to do. We're just at the beginning of the journey, but somehow that piece of the puzzle just slid right in. But both things had to be true.
I feel like I could really relate to that too. Those that know me know that I've manifested a lot of different things in terms of being a teacher, then being a recruiter, then being an account manager, now diving into my content creation journey and hosting a podcast. So I've done so many different things. I have a master's degree, and it's just interesting because I could relate to that, like dipping my toe into things, but then, like getting excited by other things at the same time. So I feel like I could learn a lot from you in terms of like really diving in head first into a goal and like sticking to that for the long haul. So I think that's a good segue to talking a little bit more about like Elite Performance Coaching Group. Tell us a little bit about that. Also tell us about your plans for the future to really dive headfirst into this new venture and to see it through and its success for a long time.
Yes. Oh, I love that question. You'll bring me in. It's appropriate, of course.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So, Elite Performance Coaching Group, we're really focused at kind of this unique intersection of sports psychology and business, and it's really sort of against this performance mindset, but with this like psychologically informed training, right? So, Dr. Todd is a board certified psychologist, and he also is the founder of Elite Psychology Group. Over at the Performance Coaching Group, we coach. And the reason why our approach is so unique is because we're coming at it from a very psychologically informed perspective. And what you want to be able to do is basically have folks be able to have sustainable results. And it starts with that awareness piece. So when you have the psychologically informed training, you're able to really get at like sustainable change. Who we work with is founders, executives, sports teams, and athletes. And basically it's about bringing out like that, that inner MVP in folks. And so we're really focused on this idea of not just performance for performance sake. There's so much research and so much data that shows us when employees, athletes have a vision and a clear mindset and are focused on their mental health, that their performance follows suit. And what I saw working across my 20 years, across Fortune 500 to, ecom to startups, was high performance, less of a focus on the well-being of the organization. And by that, that's the company's most valuable assets. And what are those? The company's employees, the people. And so it seems really easy when you break those things down, but like the through line wasn't there. And so, I was lucky enough to get a ton of different experience across different industries, and I really thought like, well, if the well-being of the people aren't front and center, then the goals and the performance won't be as sustainable. So that's really at the core of what we do, is we drive performance and we're focused on sustainable growth of the company, but we do that by accounting for the well-being and the engagement of the employees and making sure that we're looking at our goal planning holistically, including them. And so it's been, a really fun ride in terms of our offerings and how that's kind of come to life. Initially we started out with one-on-one coaching. I had immediately a couple folks reach out, like from my, old tech days, and, you can see the need in the market for this sort of thing. And then, we were, I think I mentioned this to you, but we were approached by Techstars New York to apply to their program, their incubator program, a couple of weeks ago, and that was like an out of left field opportunity. So that requires you to pull in and look at your original mission and to see like, is this a direction that we would go, if we get in, and how do we think about growing the company longer term and scaling it, which is really fun. But for the meantime, we're really focused on, immediately helping through one-to-one coaching, team coaching, group coaching, and then our courses. We're in development for a course, and we're also throwing a 2025 planning workshop here at the KIN next week or the week after, 16th.
That is so amazing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you met your business partner? I love that story.
Oh yes, Dr. Todd and I. The Cliffs Notes of that story, the highlight and the headline is we met over bad vegan pizza. The Cliffs Notes of it are that we were at Bodega Wine Bar, which for those in the area that know it, it's a very casual wine and pizza place. We did not know each other. I was having dinner and bad vegan pizza with my friend who's a neurologist, and she went to the bathroom and I looked over and Dr. Todd and his friend had the real version of the pizza. And I have nothing against vegans or vegan pizza. This particular execution was just like bad cheese. And so, I look over and I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks great. And hilarity just ensues because Dr. Todd tries the pizza, it's bad, and we get to talking. I tell him about my business background, and I don't get super far, but that's great because the conversation's flowing. And then lo and behold, he hands out this super slick elite psychology group card, and I said, well, I didn't tell you something. I'm in school for my degree in clinical psychology. Like we haven't, at Pepperdine, we hadn't gotten that far. And he was looking to open a coaching arm of his business. And so we met like 5 times actually after that. And we're like poking each other, so are you real? And sort of vetting each other, and just, talking. And then one day he emailed me and was like, I think we should go into business together, and this is kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
And so we were on the same page. But again, if I hadn't taken some of the dipping of the toe and gone back to school, the combination of my, in progress degree plus my work experience and meeting him, that all wouldn't have been the cake batter, right?
Yes. So true. It's so interesting how all of our experiences, and for you, you have so much great experience, 20 plus years of experience, right? In the work field.
That flies.
And look how amazing she looks.
Oh, thank you.
She's a day over 30.
Oh, thank you. That's all
But
the
it's
math isn't mathing
right?
there, but that's okay.
I know.
Yeah.
It's okay. We're not math.
You're sweet. Exactly.
But no, I mean, I just think it's so interesting how like all of our experiences can really come together to create and manifest such amazing opportunities when we really go all in on ourselves and take chances and put ourselves in situations to meet people, right? Like, I think, when we just stay home all the time, and it's great to make your own coffee in the morning or to make yourself lunch or to cook yourself dinner and your family, but it's also great to put yourself out there. Go to that coffee shop, go to that pizza place, like sit down and make yourself open and receptive to people coming up to you or starting conversations with people around you that look interesting, that could ultimately lead to opportunities that you never even thought could or would happen, right?
I love that so much, yes. And I just actually wrote a blog post about like developing your identity and why that's so important to unlock growth. And I think it actually is backed up by like everything that you just said, because it helps you like, discern opportunities and be open. And like, to your point, like the Techstars thing, I could have ignored that email. But we decided to like sort of put ourselves out there and announce what we were doing in order to be able to receive that. And then how do you react to that? I also think it's okay to be a little uncomfortable. Like no one wants you to be so uncomfortable that you're awkward, like not participating, but I think that goes without saying. I think it's more like if you don't know exactly how it's going to end, that's okay. Like part of life is making meaning of our experiences and pivoting accordingly. The culture that I come from in terms of especially like occupational culture, professional environment, which I think some of the background or how that can be is it can be linear. And again, it's like very high growth and it's promotion and it's power and it's all these signs of success. And it's not that those aren't true. It's just that what if you had an experience along the way that made you think that you could pivot and offer like insurmountable, exponentially more value, and sort of also, coming from you uniquely, I think sitting in that and being comfortable with pivoting and not knowing exactly how it's gonna all look exactly, but having faith that like you know that this is the direction uniquely for you. Sometimes we need that permission unlocked for us, even if we actually don't. But someone just to say like you have a unique power, and a unique value. And we can look at our experiences and say, how have they shaped us? And I think that's really important, right? Like, who would we go through life? Otherwise, we would have blinders on.
Yeah.
So your experiences are the value that shape you and how you interpret them, I think,
Yeah. What would be your advice for young people in terms of knowing whether or not they're on the right path with what they're currently doing? And I think this could be good advice for me, too.
Well, I think first is just paying attention to how you feel, the awareness. Your gut is actually lined with nerve endings from your brain. So when you feel something in your gut, there are actually the same nerve endings that are located in your brain. So it's telling you something, and I'm not saying every time you feel something in your stomach that's a little butterfly, act on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would suggest, like, how authentic does it feel for you versus do you feel like you're forcing it? And again, just with like that awareness piece, some of the daily journaling may help with that, and just kind of bringing awareness to that. And then I think the other thing is taking a look at, like, you know, what's your intent? Your intentions with it, like what are you looking to get out of it? Because not everything needs to be a promotion. It could be of the value of an experience.
Yeah.
You know, so I think really understanding, again, creating meaning from the experience. It doesn't have to look like the same meaning everyone else is creating. For instance, I've worked at companies where maybe I knew I wasn't a forever person, but I worked alongside someone who damn well was, you know, and they were a lifer, and that is also awesome. But we were different, you know, in terms of what we were there to do.
Right, and I think that kind of leads me to think about company culture, and I think that that goes hand in hand with elite performance coaching group and fostering a culture within a corporate environment that, you know, does promote like mental health, well-being, and taking care of yourself in order to enrich productivity, right?
Yeah, and I think there's this piece of the individual as well as in the collective, which is a little bit of a nebulous piece, I think, right now that I think we have an opportunity to help influence in the future. You know, a lot of these employee wellness programs that exist are fantastic, and it's a yes and.
Yeah.
Where it's really important for us individually to focus. Also, when you're in a work environment, it's not just you, is it? Like, you know, think about performance improvement plans. You used to work in HR. We don't have to go down a rabbit hole here, but is it really ever one individual? Maybe.
No, that's interesting to talk about, yeah.
But you know, if you look at the performance of an organization, you're orchestrating a lot more than just any one person, right? So how do we think about how everyone operates as a collective? And when you think about that, there's a lot of goal setting. You've heard of OKRs, we all have, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a yes and. It's expanding that to this idea of the 5 pillars of well-being. What does that look like at an individual and an organizational level? Like, how do people feel about working at your company?
Yes.
Can they see themselves contributing to the company's goals? It doesn't need to mean that every day at work is their favorite day of their entire life. Are they clear on what they need to do? Do they have the tools to do that? Like, simple things. They're not so simple in execution. But answering some of those questions and looking at things like that in the vein of performance for these companies, I think is kind of that gap that we're looking at right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Can you tell us a little bit about really what this entails? Like, what does this look like for companies? What would they expect to experience and see while partnering with Elite Performance Coaching Group?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll use one of our current clients as an example. It's a new engagement, and she's the head of a growth agency. She is in her 50s, and she is the head of growth. She's new. And one of her tasks is to align her level of workforce, so C-suite, so think like boomer, even potentially, you know, older millennial, with a much younger generation, right? Mm-hmm. And to be able to go essentially drive those goals.
Okay.
So one of the things that, you know, we're going to be able to work with these folks is basically like, first of all, a workshop, right? One side of the organization is older and has certain ways of working, and the other has other. And the older side of the workforce needs to be able to motivate the younger side. Mm-hmm. So it can't just be an iron fist. So we have to be able to facilitate engagement and discussion, right? First around a little bit of reflection, then around a little bit of inspiration, and then around a little bit of, you know, goal planning.
Yeah.
And then there's ongoing support. So, you know, that looks like some training and coaching both at the leadership level as well as the individual level for some of the younger folks. But really we focus on a lot of leadership and team because, again, we can work with individual executives, and we do. But if you think about work environments, usually it's how sort of like we operate together, and sort of thinking of that collective is really important when we think about meeting our goals and working together to meet goals. like we do in business.
So true.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the return to office mandate that a lot of companies have been integrating back into their company culture, how do you feel about RTO? Do you think that employees need to go back to being fully in the office in order to collaborate, like you said, and to work collectively together in a productive way?
I don't think they have to. I think that the idea of community and engagement is really important, and working towards a collective goal is important. There are ways to do that remotely, and a lot of people I know prefer that. So I'll say, in short, I don't think there's any right answer, and I'm certainly not the only opinion, out there on this topic. But what I would say is that no matter where you are, I think the most important thing is mattering at work and how you're connected, right? And we find, and research shows that, the leader, the manager to employee, or the leader, the team lead relationship to the team is one of those like very, very critical, relationships. So if you're able to have that remotely, then that's fantastic. And also I think it depends on the business, but and then the other thing I would say, so I think engagement's important, and then also, of course, some topic that always comes up is boundaries, right?
Yeah. So
no matter where we are, and that has to look right for you and your team. Working remotely can have its downfalls. I'm guilty of it at times, waking up and before I do anything else, starting to work, need to rein that back.
Yeah, and at 5 p.m. on a Friday too. It's like if you're still pinging your teammates, that might be something that can be rethought, right?
Right, and I think it's just sort of going back to this idea of proactive mental health. So I think sometimes we're expanding the conversation around mental health. Mental health at work, I think, is still developing, just like that sort of topic, Yeah. And so when we think about that, maybe people get uncomfortable. It's like, oh, are people being emotional at work? It's like, no, that's not what we're advocating for. What we're advocating for is the proactive management of the environments that we work in to be able to reach our goals more efficiently. So if we think about it from that perspective, what's going to get folks the most engaged? Those are things like very clear communication. Those are things like making sure that folks understand what they're supposed to do, and setting goals at the organizational level, and then also just making sure that those folks have the tools to do what they're going to do, support it. And tools include mental, emotional, and team support, managerial support, psychological safety. And so I just think that it's really interesting to think about, I don't think we have to choose between remote or return to office. To me, that's not even a conversation, to be honest. I think it's more about how are we proactively managing our workforces.
Yeah, and also facilitating work-life harmony. I know I heard this recently on LinkedIn, and it was actually from Eric Huberman, the CEO of Hawk Media, and he was talking about work-life harmony versus work-life balance. Because really, it's hard, it's challenging, I should say, to have complete work-life balance, right? That's assuming that you're spending just as much time with your family and your kids and your significant other that you are working. And that's not necessarily always the case. We spend most of our time working. That's just the reality of it.
It suggests that there's some sort of pendulum.
Right.
Where you have to get this perfect equilibrium that doesn't, really exist for people.
Exactly.
For sure.
So it's more so looking at it as a way of creating work-life harmony, right? And having those be harmonious together. So do you feel like that fits into a little bit about the mission that you're looking to accomplish at Elite Performance Coaching Group as well?
Yeah, I love this question. It's a bit of a softball just because I mentioned we're planning that 2025 workshop here at the King for members, and it's really fun because, I think we'll think about how to scale that as well, but from a holistic perspective and, incorporating some of the things that we were talking about, which is well-being, but in the vein of performance and folks reaching their goals. We are planning, sort of this workshop against the 5 pillars of well-being, but then sort of overlaying this idea of, a performance goal setting framework, and sort of how does that all map together in this harmonic setting, and sort of from a holistic goal setting standpoint, so harmony. And when we think about performance-driven environments and goal setting, like annual planning, we've all heard of like OKRs,
Yeah.
and that's awesome. And those frameworks for achieving goals, they exist for a reason. Well, what we're saying is, well, how are we looking at the 5 pillars of well-being, in terms of, that's usually one area, right? Like financial, professional, but how are we doing on emotional, social, physical, and spiritual well-being? Because we know these pillars of well-being influence each other. Again, for instance, if we're not feeling well physically, how are we going to show up at work?
Mm-hmm.
If we're giving our all over here, this is empty over here. To me, that ebb and flow is more harmonic. It gets more into like that harmony. It's not always going to look the same in every bucket, but you can start to look at like, okay, across my buckets of well-being, where am I pouring into? Check in with yourself against those. So that's a little bit of the workshop that we're going to sort of like, kick off 2025 with here. But I think there's this like just checking in with yourself on your pillars of well-being and bringing in the concept of harmony in them, and understanding where I'm at now might not be where I'm at next week, and I understand that. It's just sort of like, am I totally empty over here? Because that's not good for sustainability.
So true, and so well said. So what's the future look like for Elite Performance Coaching Group? What should we expect to see?
Yeah, well, we'll definitely continue our activities here at the KIN. I think just getting involved in the startup community, understanding the mental resilience, that's needed.
It's a great community to like come together and like just boost your business, and really a great place for entrepreneurs, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like huge
Yeah.
plug, I think, for the KIN, and even just some of the workshop that we're doing against how our pillar of social well-being is so important. I would just like double down on that from an entrepreneur standpoint. Like so many of the members I've met here really focus on, driving community, and that's important for us, just not professionally, but also personally. Being a founder, being an entrepreneur can be a lonely place. You have a vision. So creating community to share that vision, I think, is really important. But in terms of what's next for us, I think we're just going to look to continue to scale. Right now we're kind of sitting at this interesting intersection that I mentioned of sports and psychology and business, and the value that we're able to bring there. And so scaling our offerings and really fine-tuning those. So I mentioned we'll have a course coming out that, for folks who either aren't able to get involved in one-to-one coaching or just would rather prefer like more of a digital sort of self-guided format. That'll be an inner MVP course that we're coming out with for early next year. I will also be doing some peer coaching on a platform called Forum. Have you heard of it?
I think so. It sounds familiar.
It's pretty cool. It's also kind of like, what I think is neat about the coaching field is there's different like, sort of entry levels, like, that are sort of coming into innovation all the time. And so it's not just one-to-one coaching if that doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
And then kind of lastly, in terms of the scaling, I mentioned Techstars. So I think there's this like a longer term idea of productizing some of the offerings and working with workforces and using AI to potentially drive some of the thinking there. And then lastly, I think it's just this idea of, there's a really unique offering I think we've got between therapy and coaching and sort of this on-demand as needed, like subscription offering to VC portfolio companies, and basically just companies that can't have an on-staff psychologist, but that want to be able to create kind of a custom environment for their employees' well-being. So I think that's a big opportunity, and just kind of a white space in general for the category. Is how do companies create space for this, and in a flexible way that doesn't eat up their entire budget. So that's what we're going to be working with folks on too.
Yes, that is so exciting, and I think this will be such an amazing thing for enterprise level companies, Fortune 500s, mid-sized startups, all sorts of sizes of companies to integrate into their workplace culture. So I'm very inspired by this idea.
Thank you. Yeah, I am too. I think, one of the things that was like such a light bulb for me is getting the Techstars invite, and I think I told you this, and sort of writing him back, the contact, and the investment associate and saying like, hey, this is amazing. We don't have a product right now, and him being like, right, we see your experience, and essentially being like, we would be betting on you as a founder. And I think that that's so powerful, and just kind of goes back to believing in yourself, that and understanding that like you are taking strides to sort of build each move that you make, and knowing in your gut that they're right. And so for me, that was a rewarding moment, even though like no one else saw it. It was just more of like oh, you see value. And so I would just say like, don't forget to see that value in yourself, because I think that's like part of unlocking your growth. So I just so enjoyed talking to you. I could probably babble on for ages, but thank you.
That was so well said, and I'm so honored to have you on the show. I think you're so amazing and so intelligent, and our viewers can learn so much from you, and excited to attend the workshop.
Oh my gosh, yes, if you remember, come on by, otherwise stay tuned. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for this. This has been like both heartwarming and inspiring, and just like so awesome to share, so thank you.
I'm so glad to hear. And before we end here, would you mind sharing with viewers the Instagram for your business, as well as where to find you?
Yeah, so you can follow Elite Performance Coaching Group on Instagram, LinkedIn, Jesseca Lane on Instagram and LinkedIn, and then Dr. Todd Psych on Instagram, and Dr. Todd Adamson on LinkedIn. So plenty of ways to find us. And yeah, we're also involved here at the KIN. So yeah, just we'll be sharing this experience and all of the goodness to come.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jess.
Thanks.